I do not remember what I was doing the last time I was in this world. Thankfully, my past self left some clues behind. After a brief examination, I believe the first clue was about finding more copper, and the second was about building something. To do either, I must first have enough food to not starve before the spring. Thankfully, my past self was looking out for my future self on all accounts, as a pot of food was boiling nicely on the fire. I would need more, but this was an excellent start. After eating my fill, I decided to take count of my resources, starting with the food in my cellar, which I promptly began to organize according to how long it would remain edible. As for the rest of my storage, I had a decent amount of leather, ample wooden logs, and various other bits and pieces I believe I could use to build a new structure. First, however, I needed food, which meant my chickens and wild boar would need to be purged of the oldest generations. This was especially necessary as one of the baby chicks had grown into a cockerel or young rooster. If it became an adult, it would challenge the older rooster, and only one would survive. Rather than wait for the inevitable, I chose the survivor myself. My pockets full of meat and feathers, I collected some vegetables and planned out my meals for the days to come. 2 of those meals I decided to store long term, as I had plenty of livestock if I needed more food sooner rather than later. Ready to build, I cleared the land and plotted the space I wanted to use. The plan was to build a workroom for my metalsmithing. I used rammed earth in one pattern for the floor and cobblestone for the outer base of the building. I then used a darker cobblestone for the corner where the pit kilns and fire would go. I wanted to simulate the charred walls after a fire burned too close. The rest of the inner walls were made of rammed earth of a different texture. I then used fences as structural elements at the front and logs for the overhang. I wasn't sure how high up flammable materials needed to be to avoid catching fire, so I checked the handbook for other building options. Bricks made from red clay were promising, and I had plenty of red clay. While the bricks fired in the pit kilns, I reorganized some of my storage and then waited for a temporal storm to pass. As I did, I remembered that one of my goals in this game was to uncover the lore in this world. If I found some lore books, I could save those as in-game reading materials for whenever a temporal storm passed by. The storm gone, I collected my bricks, lay more bricks to be fired, and realized I needed mortar to make any brick structures. I had the materials for slaked lime, but I did not have the correct type of sand. A quick walk was all I needed, and I was able to make plenty of mortar. It didn't take long to install the inner roof, and as an extra bonus, I added a chimney above the fire corner. I then brought over a few items from my old work area to begin populating the new workspace. All that was left was the roof. I'm still figuring out how to make the ends look nice, but I suppose this works for now. It still needs a bit of lighting, but that would have to wait. I gathered some food, made backup tools, and set out to explore. I was hoping to find surface copper, but with everything covered in snow, that seemed unlikely. I did find a large ruin and marked it on my map to explore once the weather improved. I collected wild vegetables, found more ruins, and watched the darkness of night approach. I would soon need shelter, and though I had brought enough materials for a quick place to sleep, I would have preferred a cave or some other natural structure. Instead, I spotted a light in the distance. A humble trader carrying something called a resonator. Rigby has many interesting items for sale. If I'd brought my gears, I might have considered trading for one or two. The night was long and cold, so much so that I woke to freezing winds and a sharp chill. I would need a fire, and quick. I threw down the kindling, piled on the wood, and set it alight. The chill faded, and I could travel once more. In one unusual cave, I found the ruins of a room. It was filled with broken furniture, including a crate with a few items I didn't really need. I came across the treasure hunter quill and made note to return once I had something to trade. I then found more ruins, grabbed some bony soil, and returned home. Winter did not seem to be the ideal time to go exploring, so I pondered what else I could do. I had marked clay on my map in several places, and I would eventually need a storeroom, a larger coal pit, and an area for a windmill. If exploring was out, then building would have to be in. I began by collecting clay. I'd originally thought it was a small patch, but the more I dug, the more the clay I found. The pit got deeper and deeper, and my pockets were soon full to the brim. I even used several stacks to make raw bricks, and after filling my pockets once more, I still had not exhausted the clay from this area. I made my way back home, only to be greeted by several rifts. As I watched, more opened before my eyes, blocking the path with ominous intent. I slipped past and checked the rift activity levels. Apocalyptic. Oh dear. I hurriedly emptied most of the clay from my pockets and started filling the pit kilns with raw clay bricks. I planned to get them burning before things got really bad, but I ran out of time and rushed to take shelter in my house. There I spent time crafting more resources from the clay. I would need more storage vessels, bowls for oil lamps, and jugs for the vast amount of wine I had made. I also needed more sticks, and this time I remembered I had shears. So I got to work clearing the land. Ready to fire the kilns, I laid the sticks and peat moss and pulled out my torch. I took a brief moment to hunt a shiver, and then started collecting dirt. My next build would be a storage building for all the materials I planned on collecting. The ideal block for the walls was, of course, rammed earth. It had that concrete appearance that would be perfect for a warehouse. For those of you who don't know, I am not especially good at spelling. As such, while I was typing this script, I originally wrote warehouse instead of warehouse, which of course made me think of were creatures. I wondered if a warehouse might be a building which turned into a house during a full moon. That train of thought stopped as darkness suddenly fell on my world. Was it an eclipse? Did eclipses usually happen so close to nightfall? The light returned, and I was immediately jump-scared by a shiver. Naturally, I retaliated with extreme violence. On returning to my base, I remembered that my new workroom had pit kilns, which I could fill with the clay items I had crafted. I decided to start with the vessel and the bowls, since I would need storage and light sources before anything else. After some consideration, I decided to make clay shingles. Normally, I wouldn't bother since they take so long to make enough for builds. But the nights were extremely long now, and I needed something to occupy my time while I waited for the sun to rise again. I also had an absurd amount of clay and could get more at any time, so I wasn't worried about using it up on shingles. In the morning, I began digging the foundation for the next build project. I started by laying out the path and then digging a spot where I could place a windmill. I assumed I would need several windmills at some point, but I would start with this one. I tried to estimate how much space I would need for the stairs upward and a central pillar, assuming I wouldn't just use a ladder. Next, I split the path just before the bridge and tried to estimate how much room I would need for the warehouse. I added some more blocks to the corner and lamented that my pockets had gotten full. Thankfully, the pit kilns in the workshop had finished burning, which meant I could unload the clay from my pockets into the clay vessel and start the next set of materials to cook. For some reason, the original pit kilns were not done yet. I wondered if they were too far away and hadn't loaded into the world, or maybe it was too cold and they were taking longer because they had less shelter from the winter winds. Except I was pretty sure pit kilns still burned no matter how far away you went, so maybe it was just a glitch. I decided there was little I could do, so I made some oil lamps and placed them in the workshop. I could now return to digging the foundation for the new structures. I counted out the space needed for double chests and walking space between them, while imagining that this building would be at least 2 stories high, though I hadn't yet figured out how many blocks that would be. I adjusted the path to where I estimated the front door would be, and did my best to ignore the growing number of rifts around my base. I wanted to connect the warehouse to the windmill, and then have the windmill connect to a structure opposite the warehouse for all the mechanical machinery which would be powered by the wind. Another eclipse interrupted my progress, but only briefly. I knew I would not have the materials to build everything for some time, but I saw no reason to wait that long. I collected the next set of clay items from the workshop and again wondered at the old pit kiln's lack of progress. It seemed I would need an entirely new set of pit kilns near my workshop if I wanted to make any progress with them. So I dug some holes, made them look nice, and placed a roof overhead. I started the new pit kilns up and ended my day. By the next morning, the old pit kilns had finally burned themselves out. I collected the materials and watched as yet another eclipse darkened the sky. This seemed like far too many times for the moon to cross the sun in several days' time. Ignoring that oddity, I began collecting stones, which would be combined with dirt to make pathways. When it got dark, I returned to my base to empty and then refill the kilns. I wasn't sure this would be enough, but it would at least get me started. I quickly looked up brick slabs in the handbook and made several. My plan was to use these as the central walkway within the warehouse, with raised areas for the storage chests. First, I would lay down the stone path. Stone paths are great for many reasons. The first is that snow doesn't gather too much on them. The second is that you actually move faster when on the path. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough stone for the full walkway, so I would have to collect more. This took me some distance from my base, but I did find lead ore, which I marked on my map. I also found several goats, which I would need to tame eventually. Getting them back to my base would be difficult, so it might be better to set up a taming pen on the mountain, but that would have to wait for another day. As I gathered more rocks, I came across fire clay. I had found this patch way back when I started this world, but I didn't have a base yet, so I had marked my map and moved on. Today, however, I had plenty of inventory space and a base with storage, so I gathered all of it. I gathered many more rocks and returned to my base. Another batch of clay in and out of the pit kilns, followed by an unwelcome visitor who wasn't even kind enough to bring gifts. I made some shingled roofs and slept through the night. I laid down more block paths and began with the floor of the warehouse. I ended up having to put back all the dirt I had removed in order to match my plan. I was also reminded that you can use the crafting grid to make all the slabs lay horizontal if you wish. I placed the last of the clay items in the kilns and realized I needed more sticks. Thankfully, I still had my shears, so it would not take long to collect them. Pit kilns finally lit and plenty of daylight remaining. I decided to collect some firewood, starting with the tree closest to my base. As the logs tumbled down, I noticed something extra had entered my inventory. Honey. Apparently that tree had contained a hive, and I hadn't noticed. I had just wasted an opportunity to collect bees. Gosh darn it. As I lamented the loss, I realized I would need more food soon. I had plenty of sealed pots in my cellar, but I would rather save those until I absolutely needed them. Instead, I took this time to remove the Gen 1 hens from the flock. As I did, I noticed a young cockerel mixed in with the rest. This meant the old rooster would have to go. As I harvested the meat and feathers, I received a notice of a temporal storm incoming. I finished one more chicken and hurried to take shelter. While the storm warped time itself, I started cooking the chicken in my fireplace. All I could do was wait it out. The storm disagreed and sent a shiver into my home to strike me down. I woke in my dirt hut with 16 respawns remaining on the temporal return point. I grabbed the spear from the wall and watched a drifter push against my door. How much time did I have before the storm ended? Would my things despawn before I could collect them? I didn't want to take that risk, so I charged out the door and ran to my house. The shiver was gone, and I collected my things without worry. I then waited, armed and ready, as the storm finally waned. I collected the last of my clay items from the kilns, which included more storage vessels. I still needed more firewood, so I set out to chop logs. It wasn't much, but it would hopefully last until the spring. I also didn't want to get caught by another shiver or some temporally corrupted thing getting into my home again. So I grabbed some plaster and a couple doors and closed off my room. Hopefully, it would be enough. More importantly, I had a warehouse to build, and hopefully enough materials to build it. Oak planks would be the raised area for the chests. I didn't have any chests, but I would have a place to put them once I did. I needed a bit more dirt to fill out the ground under the floor, and dug away at the nearby hill. I decided to have the corner of the building turn into one step lower than the main part, so the wood floor became level with the brick floor. I needed a few more brick slabs to extend it out, and got distracted by my trapdoor, which I kept tripping over. I moved it over and then returned to working on the warehouse. Now that the floor was in, I could begin on the walls. I used a more detailed rammed earth texture for the corners and areas I thought would be in shadow, and a similar but less detailed texture for the rest. I placed oak logs as support columns, and realized the front door, which was centered from the inside, was not centered from the outside. Naturally, I had to move it and the path over. I still needed to place the stone walls as the base of the platform, but that would have to wait until I had a pickaxe again. I continued until it got dark, and then returned with the rising sun. As the walls rose higher, I left an open space on each end of the brick floor for windows. I did not have glass yet, but I could make do with other materials until then. For the second floor, I used oak slabs and created 2 loft areas connected by a narrow walkway. I debated having only 1 ladder to the second floor, but decided 2 ladders looked better. I then ran out of rammed earth, as well as oak logs. I would need to collect more of both. As luck would have it, my search for more oak began with finding native copper. I marked my map so I could return as soon as I had a new pickaxe. I also found some food and a pack of wolves. Unfortunately, they were near the oak I needed, so I dug a pit to trap them. This nearly backfired, as a wolf bit me just as I was digging an escape route. Thankfully, I had dug 2 escape routes and was able to run to the second one while trapping the wolf. I lost half my health, but managed to catch 2 of the wolves. The third wolf had wandered further away, which allowed me to chop down the tree I needed. I still needed more oak and wandered further away. In addition to oak, I found lots of walnut trees. I would have to return for those later. Returning to base, I made some oil lamps to light up the warehouse. I don't think they would fully spawn-proof the building, but they should help a little until I could make proper lamps. In the meanwhile, I finished the oak log supports. Now I just needed rammed earth to finish the walls. At long last, I could place the roof. Red ceramic shingles took so long to make, but they looked quite fantastic. The only downside was I did not have enough. I spent some time shaping more clay, once again ran out of sticks, and got chased by a giant bear which really wanted to eat me. I tried to lead it into the beast pit and nearly got wrecked in the attempt. On the plus side, I now have a new bearskin rug. In the meanwhile, the snow had started melting. Spring was close at hand. While I waited for the pit kilns to burn, I checked on my chickens. I needed food, so I eliminated the weakest ones from the flock. I also found that another rooster had grown up while I was busy and had fought my Gen 2 rooster to the death. Sadly, the Gen 1 rooster was the one to survive. At least I had more food to eat. More importantly, the warmer weather meant I could start planting crops again. I wasn't entirely sure if this was the best time to start planting, but I figured it was worth a shot. Sadly, my farmland was looking undernourished. I knew ground bones would add nutrients to the soil, so I threw a whole stack in the quern and started grinding. It wasn't enough for all the farmland, but it should make a difference for a few crops. What I really needed was mulch, which meant throwing a bunch of rot into a barrel and waiting. It would take time, but once I had it, I could make better farmland. Crops planted, I returned to my warehouse, placed some fences as temporary windows, and continued working on the roof. I also replaced the railing, added more oil lamps, and made more shingles because I still did not have enough. While those burned, I grabbed some walnut logs to use as interior support columns and beams. I moved the oil lamps so they would light more space. I finally finished the roof and sealed the wall. All it needed was a couple doors, and I could call it done. Sure, the part of the building which would eventually connect to the windmill was still open to the elements, but the main part was done and waiting for storage. Thank you for watching, everyone, and take care of yourself.